Hello, I'm the Accidental Bookseller. My name's Paul. Welcome to the channel. Today, something a little bit different. A couple of days ago, I was watching a video by Emily at Reads, and she was doing the book tag around 10 particular books that have been on your shelves unread for more than a year. Her tag and her choices were particularly good and interesting. So I thought, I'm going to do that. And I was looking at my own shelves, and as I came up with the list of 10, I was reminded of the fact that so many books don't just give back memories of the contents of the actual book within them, but they evoke memories of when you bought a particular book, when you were reading a particular book, and they can coincide with moments in your life or periods in your life where, similar to when you listen to a piece of music, you can see a particular book and it'll remind you of a particular memory in your life. And so I thought, what particular books can not necessarily define me, but how many books can I put in a tag where it will give a really nice broad section of who I am and particularly important memories in my life. Obviously, I'm quite new to this sort of thing, Booktube. I've never done a book tag before in terms of making one up. I thought, well, why not? I've got the books beside me. I'll go through them to give hopefully it'll give a better understanding of me as the person and how the person interacts with books and the memories that they evoke. I've copied in 10 particular booktubers who I enjoy watching that I subscribe to. And if you want to do the tag, by all means do them. Maybe you like the idea of that, maybe you don't. Anyone watching this who wants to do the same, please do so. If you don't fancy doing it, don't do it. From what I've seen, when you do a tag, you list who invented the tag and some people who you nominate however many you like. If you could put my name on it somewhere or mention me somewhere, and then if it does take off, I'll get to see all the memories that all different booktubers have listed and created and described as a result of me thinking of this subject. Having said that, it's probably going to die a very quick death and nobody will be interested, but I'll put mine down. Take it with a pinch of salt or enjoy it or whatever. If you do like my videos, by the way, please click subscribe or like. It would mean the world to me, so if you do that, that'd be great. Thank you. Now then, the first book, or books really, and it's The Lord of the Rings. I've got the 3 books individually. Obviously the Fellowship, the Two Towers, and of course The Return of the King. In my all-time faves anyway, but they're in this particular tag video because whenever I see them, I think of my mum. When I was about 12 or 13, I asked her, well, every summer in the school holidays, me and my sister would go to my nana and granddad's to stay in the day because my dad was working, my mum worked. During that time, I read a lot, played out a bit as you do when you're little, but essentially just read loads, as I've always done. And I got to hearing about The Lord of the Rings. One day I asked my mum if she could buy them for me. And I wasn't a kid that asked for a lot, but she bought them for me. And I devoured them in order. I prefer The Return of the King, then The Two Towers, and then The Fellowship. But loved them as a piece of work. Like I say, I just remember them being from my mum. So I went to see her today. She's in a care home now. She has Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And I wanted to thank her again for buying me these, because I'm conscious that outside of a birthday and outside of Christmas, people buy you presents and you might say thank you, and you might say thank you when you were a kid, but do you really appreciate that someone has sacrificed their own little bit of pleasure, their own little bit of money that they could either spent on themselves or something else, and they've done it for you? They've made that little bit of a sacrifice, or as big a sacrifice, because we weren't wealthy in those days at all. she's made a sacrifice in buying these for me. So I reminded her of it today and thanked her. So what I'd like you to do, if you can, is think of a present that you've received from someone where it's outside of Christmas, it's outside a birthday, and say, look, I really appreciate that you did this for me. That's the first one over with. I think of my mum. The second one, and they're not necessarily in chronological order. The second one is, which one I'm going to pick? Banana milkshake today. We'll choose this one. They're quite a wide variety, as you'll see. The Confessions of Aleister Crowley. This particular edition has never been opened since I bought it. It stayed in there. I've got it in Waterstones. Oh, I'm going to say 30 years ago, maybe. And it's never left the wrapping. And it's because I'd already read it by this stage, but I wanted a particular copy. In an earlier video that I did, I think it was in my newbie tag, I mentioned that in a very, very early stages of my life, I was in hospital a lot. I had quite a few operations. As a result of that, particular bones in my feet didn't develop properly or grow at the right angles to make it comfortable. I was mobile, but I was in increasing amounts of pain, but they couldn't do anything about it until I stopped growing. Then when I reached the age of 16, 17, I had to go in hospital, and they hammered metal spikes into me feet, into my foot, and the metal spikes stuck out about that far from the end of my foot, and I was completely, as a result of that, I was pretty much immobile for, I'm going to say, 2 months. I'm also allergic to general anaesthetics, so when they were ramming these things in the operating theatre, I was awake under local, which was an experience. But during that time of immobility, I had selected some books to read. One of them was 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. Another was The Dead Zone by Stephen King. Still my favourite Stephen King novel. Not my favourite Stephen King story, because that's The Mist, but my favourite Stephen King novel is The Dead Zone. And then additionally, out of the library, adult library, I'd got The Confessions of Aleister Crowley and really, really enjoyed it. So now when I look at my shelf, I think of the time when I had the operation and I was immobile, and in my formative teen years stroke becoming adult, I read The Confessions of Aleister Crowley. A little bit of a controversial read, of course, but very glad I did it, and read other stuff in the future beyond this particular date. So that's the second one. The third one is probably the most powerful memory of my life. It marked I'm going to say a particularly important milestone in my life, in terms of it was certainly the most enjoyable period. I've mentioned this author before, and it's Necroscope by Brian Lumley. As you can see, I've got all the Necroscopes, and I've got pretty much 3.5 to 4 shelves of Brian Lumley. Why does this evoke so many memories? I just have to look at it and I get a real flood of powerful memories. I got this in a bookshop in Birmingham. At the time, I was about, I'm going to say 19, 20, and I was on tour. Well, not on tour, but at that time, I used to follow a band round the country to every single gig that they did in the UK. The band was a goth band called Christian Death. And by following them round, I meant I hitched. So a tour is announced, and they may be playing 9 or 10 dates, 7 or 8 dates, or one-off dates. And I would hitch from one venue to the next along the tour, from one night to the next. And after the gig, I would sleep rough, either in a car park or in a doorway or just wherever I could. It was an age when different bands had those types of followers. It's like I say, it was a different age, because I just don't think that happens now, mainly because a lot of younger people have cars and can afford cars, and you probably can't hitch these days from a safety perspective, although it was far from safe then. So yeah, I did this. It was in the second time period of the band Christian Death. The original founder, Rozz Williams, my all-time hero, had left the band. The second iteration had come about, and I started following them. I'd got into them around 1984, 85, but this was 1986, 7, 1986, 87, 88, a bit of 89, where I did this, saw them 29 times live in total, and I stopped seeing them when there's a lady in the band called Chitandamon. She left, and there was one guy left, the lead singer, Velo. He's carried on, but since 1989, the music has not been something that I can recommend. But anyway, during this period of hitching, and occasionally I would buy, on a particular tour, I would buy a train pass. So day after day, I could just get a train, and at night after the gig, I would get on a night train, and because I had a pass where I could go anywhere, I would maybe go half the distance. So if, let's say, I was in Birmingham for the gig, I would get on a train, go to Carlisle, sleep on the train to Carlisle, and then get off there about 2 or 3 in the morning and get a train back. And you'd cover the night that way, and then you'd go make your way on a train to the next venue. So sometimes I hitched, sometimes I had a train pass for the tours. During the day, you had to kill your days. Some days when it was really bad weather, they let me in. There was 3 of us doing the tours separately, making our own way. But we got let in to the gigs for the sound check, and we just sat around. I even wrote poetry in the dressing room with the lead singer at one stage. On one particular day in Birmingham, I was going around the bookshops, and I saw this particular book, Brian Lumley, Necroscope. This was pre-internet, of course, so I had no idea, not the faintest idea who Brian Lumley was. And I was drawn by the cover. It's obviously it's horror. I don't know whether to call it proper horror, because I don't really count people like Stephen King as horror. I'll read you the blurb on the back. The outer limits of horror. From the undead vampire in the Romanian mausoleum, Boris Dragazani tries to draw an evil force so powerful he will gain supremacy in the ultra-secret paranormal agency he works for in Russia. His official job is as a necroscope. His specialty is tearing secrets from the souls of newly dead traitors. And England too has her necroscope, her communicator with the dead. When Harry Keogh is recruited by the British Secret Service to take on the paranormal menace from behind the Iron Curtain, the stage is set for the most horrifying, violent, supernatural confrontation ever. Necroscope is a brilliantly inventive horror novel from the author of the Psychomet trilogy, topical, unpredictable, shocking, and completely impossible to put down. So I saw this on the shelf in Birmingham, but I didn't buy it straight away. And around the time that I saw this, I'd also started doing the tours of a band called Fields of the Nephilim. Like Christian Death, I would go from gig to gig, again, sleep rough, either train pass or hitch. With the Nephilim, there was quite a lot of people at early doors doing this. There was maybe up to about 40 to 50 people doing it. And then in the later years, there was probably only about 7 or 8 of us doing it. I think it was, I think on a Christian Death tour, I'd seen this in the shop, but I hadn't bought it because I didn't have a lot of money in those days. And then I was doing a Nephilim tour, I saw it, and then I bought it. Like I say, I stopped following Christian Death because Chitandamon had left, and just the creativity had died as a result of her leaving. And I was left following the Nephilim, which was kind of handy because it was becoming increasingly hard work-wise to be able to factor in 2 different tours. In those days, you'd get at least 1 tour a year, possibly 2. Fortunately, Christian Death were American, so they didn't come across as much. If there were 2 UK bands, I probably wouldn't have been able to do it. But I stopped doing Christian Death, threw everything behind following the NEPHILIM, ended up seeing them 68 times. Whenever I look at Brian Lumley's Necroscope, I'm reminded of the absolutely wonderful times I had following Christian Death and Fields of the NEPHILIM. So there we go. I should also say that in a future video, I'm going to do, and you may like the idea of this, you might not, but I'm going to do a video called Books for Goths, where it covers lots of different bands from the proper goth era of the 1980s and books associated with them. And it could be either books that they've written themselves, books that have been written about them, or books about things that are in their songs or part of the band's culture. So, for instance, with the second Fields of NEPHILIM album, lovely gatefold sleeve, by the way, there's a track called, the opening track is Endemoniada, and it has a sample on it of someone saying Penitentia Agite, and then intermingled between the starts and ends of other songs, there's Gregorian chant sampled in. And those are taken from the film of The Name of the Rozz. Penitentia Agite is shouted by the hunchback played by Ron Perlman in The Name of the Rozz, and the whole sample and use of those samples really gives the NEPHILIM album a more medieval feel to it. And the film was already one of my favourite films anyway. In fact, when I was in a band, and the music that we walked on stage with was the soundtrack of The Name of the Rozz, the track called Scriptorium. The soundtrack is fantastic by James Horner. So yeah, I'm going to do a particular video where it introduces lots of different books about goth bands and blends in various influences and books involving their music and them themselves and influences mentioned in songs. So take of that what you will. You may like it, you may not. I should also say, I mentioned Rozz Williams was the creator of Christian Death, and he'd left by the time that I started doing the tours. Returning to, and one of his major influences was David Bowie. The connection between this and David Bowie is these particular UK covers of Necroscope. The artwork is by a guy called George Underwood. George Underwood went to school with David Bowie and also designed many of David Bowie's album covers. In fact, as a school friend, he got into a fight with David Bowie, and one of his, I believe it was either a punch or something, that caused David Bowie to have different coloured eyes. That's why he has an eye one colour and an eye another colour, because of the fight that took place between George Underwood and David Bowie. Obviously became firm friends after that. But yeah, so there's the connection between Rozz Williams of Christian Death, David Bowie, and Brian Lumley's Necroscope, which not many people care about, I imagine, but it's just a nice extra to know. So the next book is something which I didn't plan to get. Normally, I know in advance that I'm going to buy a particular book. I'll think about it for a bit, and it'll go on a mental list of, oh, I quite fancy it, and then I'll see it in the wild and I'll get it either new or secondhand. The year was about 2004, and at that time, me and my cousin Rachel in Canada, we would each buy each other for Christmas / birthday a book and a CD, but based around our country of origin, so something that was particularly either British or was popular in Britain, and vice versa for Canada. I saw this on the shelf and it just stood out at me. And I read the blurb on the back, thought, I'm getting this. So I actually got 2 copies, one for me and one for her. And when I read it, yeah, there's moments where I cried. There's moments of just joy when you realise you're reading such an incredible book, which should in future years be a school text. It's as good as a classic in my eyes, and it's a foreign language book. In the number of books that he's written, the same translator has been used each time, translating from Spanish to English by a lady called Lucia Graves. And when I've read different other foreign books, and then the same author has used a different translator. So I'm reminded of the Japanese author Natsuo Kirino, who's a crime author, where the 3 books that I've read of hers that were translated into English are all by 3 different translators, and they read like 3 very different writers. So I think this particular author benefits from having the same beautifully fantastic translator, and just the most incredible book. And then I moved from the Isle of Man to the Midlands, and around the first year or so that I was there, I became aware that this particular author was visiting the Hay Festival at Hay. I'd never been to the Hay Festival. Whenever I think of this book, I now think of it's probably the only book where my memory centers around the pleasures of the book, and also the pleasures of visiting Hay Festival for the first time. I'm not so much of a fan of Hay Festival anymore because it seems to have become, in my opinion, a bit elitist and a bit up their own backsides a bit. But at the time, it was just a really special place to visit with like-minded book lovers, and it still is to that extent, but the organisation around it just appears changed now. Anyway, this particular author was doing a reading or a talk for an hour or so at Hay, so I got a ticket, drove the 2 hours, went to meet him, doing the signing afterwards, queued up, shook his hand. I remember to this day, I just shook his hand and said, "I am truly honoured to meet you," which is a bit cheesy, but I genuinely was, and I genuinely still am honoured that I've met this particular author. And then I'm trying not to get upset here. Grew to just love him in his other works. And then it was just around the time I think COVID had happened. It was around 2020 or 2021. It was a Saturday morning, and I was reading that he died. He'd been suffering from cancer, and he passed away. And I have never cried so much just for the death of an author. It still upsets me now. Anyway, this particular author is Carlos Ruiz Zafón of The Shadow of the Wind. Please read this book. It's beautiful. Right, I've calmed down a bit now. The next book is, see what I mean about different books and memories, and how just seeing a book can evoke certain memories and flashbacks for your life. So this next book is Blessed by George Best. I won't class it as a particularly favourite book. Similar to The Lord of the Rings, this reminds me of my late father. He didn't buy me many books in adulthood, but when he bought me about 4 or 5 for Christmas or birthday, but the choices that I made were just nice and well thought out. And I've supported Manchester United since the mid-70s, just after they got promoted from what was then the second division to the first division, long before there was a Premier League. My dad was working in Manchester in roughly, well, I can say when it was, 2001, 2002, and working today in Manchester and driving back home at night. He'd seen that George Best was doing a signing for this particular book. And there's been a number of different autobiographies by George Best, or for George Best, or about George Best. But this is probably the most complete book about his life, the maverick that is George Best. So my dad, bless him, he queued up for a long time because the queue was enormous. And he got it signed by George Best. So I see this on the shelf and I just think of my dad and him queuing up for me, taking the time to do that for me. And it's just such a nice memory. The next book it's a bit of an odd one, this. And I think this is number 6, I believe. I think it's number 6. So this is this is Solitaire. And this is a book all about solitaire card games, which I've had since sometime in late October 1981. It's from America, from when we first went to America as a family when I'd be 13. I was in my early teens, I was into playing Patience and Solitaire with cards, and I used to collect different playing cards sets. We were at probably a Winn-Dixie or another particular American supermarket in Florida, and it was a Friday night. There was near the store, near the supermarket, there was a open late bookstore, and in this bookstore I saw this particular book. And then over a number of different visits to the supermarket during the first part of the holiday, I immediately just went to this and kept browsing through it. And eventually, after about 4 or 5, 6 days, I put some of my holiday money towards it. It's had some hammer, I'll tell you. But whenever I look at this, I'm reminded of the first, when we went to America for the first time. And also, I'm also reminded that that particular holiday was the first time I saw an American football game. The Jets played the Giants on TV. I'd never seen anything like it before. And that became the sporting passion of my life. So when I see that, when I see this book, I'm also reminded of that moment as well in 1981. It's a bit of an odd, different one, but that's number 6. Number 7 is James Herbert Others. The year is roughly, I'm going to say 2000-ish. Yeah, 2000-ish. And I was in London for the weekend as a tourist, because probably like many British people, I'd used London as a bit of a hub, but never as a tourist. You go to London if you fly out of London somewhere abroad, or you'll go to London if you're going to a gig, or when I was on tour previously with bands. I'd never actually been round the sights of London, so I booked a weekend. During that time, unbeknownst to me, I found out a couple of days before that James Herbert was doing a signing for Others. I mentioned this on a previous tag, so if you've seen that one, apologies for the repeat. There was a train strike on, a tube strike, and he was signing in. It was on not Oxford Street. What's the one near Oxford Street? The other big main street. There's either a Borders or it was a Borders or a Waterstones. I think it might have been Borders. Can't remember which of the shops. One of the big chains anyway. He was doing a sign in there, and there was this tube strike on, and I was catastrophically late. By catastrophically late, I mean an hour and a half, 2 hours late. But I carried on. I might be too late for seeing him talk, but I might be there for a signing or something. As I'm walking up to go in the shop, James is coming out with his assistant, and they're both absolutely laden down with stuff. And I mean by laden down, I mean stacked up with stuff. And I think they had a car there's a nearby car park. I presume so, because they wouldn't have been going far with the amount of stuff that they had. So I went up to them, and I don't normally do this sort of thing, but I'm a James Herbert fan, and I explained that I'd come to the signing and I'm terribly late because of the tube strike that's on, but could I at least take a photo of him? And this was long before selfies, because I'd had my normal tourist camera. I tend not to use my phone for that type of photo. I've got a camera to take photos with. So I asked him the question, and he says, "Oh, we can do better than that." And he proceeded to put all his mountain of gear that he had on the pavement, just on the pavement, next to him. And he asked his assistant to do the same. And he said, give your camera to my assistant and she'll take a photograph of us. I was dumbfounded. He put, I remember, so we stood in the street. He had his arm round my shoulder and she took the photo and I was effusive of thanks because he just did not have to do that. This is in my my kind of hall of fame of books in terms of all time favourites, just from the strength of the book. Anyway, I know people swear by his book The Rats and its sequels, and also The Fog, which was a famous John Carpenter film as well. But this is my favourite, James Herbert. I can't help seeing this and thinking of that particular moment. It's just such a nice, beautiful moment. Now, on that same trip, on the Sunday, I became aware of a book fair that was on near the Houses of Parliament, and I picked up The Nightland, Volume 1 and Volume 2 by William Hope Hodgson. One of the, I know it's a cult favourite, but I still believe he's underrated. The House on the Borderland is in my all-time favourite list. If I was drawing up an all-time top 10, which I am doing for future videos, so I've probably spoilt 2 or 3 from that list already. But yeah, I only paid about £5 or £6 each for these. So considering what they go for now, I got extreme good value. When I think of that particular weekend, even though I got these and I'm chuffed, because he didn't write that long, did William Hope Hodgson, because he died in the First World War. He's buried in one of the big cemeteries in France. But yeah, I don't necessarily think of the weekend as a result of these two. I think of James Herbert and others and him in the street and just being the most wonderful person. Again, when he passed, although he was in his, I think it was late 60s, early 70s, but it was still relatively unexpected when he did pass. I was left just with such beautiful memories of a really, really nice man. The final book is a heavy book. So after the NEPHILIM split up and I stopped doing their tours, so this was in about 91-ish, I then went on to kind of the next phase in my life where I started backpacking, and I did 3 trips around Europe. And because of what I've done before in terms of sleeping rough, I didn't necessarily do what normal people do in terms of going to hostels and spending a few days in a particular city. I got the Thomas Cook timetable that you could get at the time with all the different train times in Europe. And the preceding winter, I would plan in advance what day I was going to be where, and I would sleep on the train that night. And each day for each city per day would be at 7-hour or 8-hour travel intervals from the city on the following day. I wouldn't necessarily sleep in a sleeper carriage or a couchette, as they used to call them. It would just be in the normal carriage. A lot of carriages in Europe at that time were what I would call Sherlock Holmes carriages, where there's like a corridor down one side of the carriage, and you opened a door into a compartment with about 6 seats, like you see on Agatha Christie films or, like I say, Sherlock Holmes films. That's how I got round from city to city to city to city, save up all my holidays during the course of the year and get permission to take about 3 or 4 weeks. I'd get to see 21 or 22 cities that way. And then once I did that, I got the idea, I want to go to America and do the same, but on Greyhound buses. Because you could get, not convinced that you still can do it for a countrywide pass, but in those days, you could get a countrywide pass where you paid X number of pounds. It felt like a lot of money then, but I don't think it is now. I think it was maybe about £150 or £200 back in 1994 when I went. But like my previous trips, because I'd got a grounding and experience in that sort of thing, of the way I travel, I went from city to city to city each day, and slept on the bus at night, which is one hell of a slog when you're doing it on a coach. And each night, I remember it would pull into a city at about 1:30, 2:00 in the morning, and there'd be a McDonald's there, and I would get a meal, and I still am reminded when I have a McDonald's apple pie. If I have one of them, I'm reminded of the 2:00 in the morning stops on the Greyhound buses. I think I can remember the route that I took. I should have written it down, but I like kind of remembering it. So I remember I flew to Boston, and I then got the bus to Buffalo and Niagara Falls, bus to New York, bus to Atlanta. From Atlanta, I went to Memphis for Graceland. Not particularly a fan of Elvis, but when in America doing that sort of trip, you go to Graceland. From there, I went to New Orleans. From New Orleans, I went to Dallas, the 6-4 book depository. I even stood in the road where JFK's motorcade car was, not necessarily dodging traffic because it was a quiet day, but pointing my camera up to the 6-4 depository, pointing my camera to the grassy knoll. Not particularly into that kind of conspiracy theories, but when in Dallas, that's what you do. Went from Dallas to Houston because my team was the Houston Oilers, since became the Tennessee Titans because they moved, but I had tickets for a game at the Astrodome. From Houston, I went to Los Angeles. From Los Angeles, I went to San Francisco. This is all night after night after night. No, actually, Houston to Albuquerque, because I then had my first overnighter in a motel in Albuquerque because I wanted to see the NFL games that particular Sunday. So I booked just a nearby motel, watched the games in Albuquerque, and then the day after went to Los Angeles. You can imagine like steaming heat. And when you get Los Angeles to San Francisco back to Anaheim for Disneyland, then to Las Vegas, from Las Vegas to Denver because I wanted to go to Boulder because my college team is the Colorado Buffaloes. So went to that game, back to Denver, then a long trip from Denver to Chicago, from Chicago to Washington to DC. I did 2 days there because it's such a great place. So I was overnight there. Then I went from Washington DC to Montreal. Then I went from Montreal to New York again. Then New York to Boston, and Boston and home. Oh, I've missed one out. I can't believe I've missed it out, and because of this. So, so yeah. During which it was early in the trip. So it was when I first went to New York before I went to Atlanta. So I went New York to Canton, Ohio, and the Pro Football Hall of Fame, then back to New York, and then to Atlanta. That's it. And I got 75 seasons, and I can't believe the condition that it's in after a full 3 weeks in a rucksack traveling around America. And at that stage, it was the 75th anniversary of the NFL. And so this particular book was out. There's lots of facts, lots of pictures, and yeah, it's a real treasure. And yeah, so I look at this on my shelf, and I'm reminded of that particular trip, what became a lifelong passion for professional and college American football. I for a number of seasons in the 90s, I even wrote for Sky Sports doing sort of technical previews of the games that they do. So yeah, it's more than just a passion. I guess different people have different sports that they follow. So yeah, so that's the 8th memory. I don't think I've got anything more to say. Yeah, I thought it's something different to your favourites or books that you want to read. And just like I said before at the start, there's particular books where you see them on the shelf and they provoke major memories of your life. So I've picked 8, and if you're watching this, please do the 8 memories book tag. Doesn't have to be 8. It's however many. I think the maximum. I set one rule, which is a maximum of 8, because I could have done more, but I kept it 8. But you might not have 8. You might want to do less. And like I say, you might want to not give as much personal information out as I have. You've got complete carte blanche on what you do with it. So that's the 8 memories book tag. What I said I would do, I would nominate some people if they want to do the tag. There's no pressure. If you don't want to do it, you don't want to do it. Don't feel obliged in any shape or form. These are 10 people that I follow, and if you want to do it, you want to do it. Absolutely fine if you don't. So those 10 people are Science Fiction Retirement Library, Charlotte Shelves, Paulina Maria, Joseph Reads Books, M Reads A Continuing Education, Woodland Bunny, Grammaticus Books, As I Lay Reading, Alan's Reads, Library of a Silver Saint. Now, some of those will be thinking, who on earth is this guy that's copied me into this? Because some people I've corresponded with over the last couple of months, some people I haven't, just in comments in videos and things. And some people will think, who the hell's he? So I apologise in advance for dropping in on you like this, but I subscribe to you if you've never heard of me before. I just thought I'd list you on here because you are interesting, and it would be nice to hear more about what memories you might have in terms of particular books. So there we go. So that's the 8 memories book tag. I'll sign off here and say I'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.